Good evening. This is John Bushka. I'm going to be doing some more personal videos in the next couple of weeks, and we'll go back to using Camtasia soon. But I just wanted to state some biographical facts tonight about myself, in view of all the controversy about some things recently, and just state exactly where throughout my life I've stood in some of these issues. I was born in 1943 with what they call a hallux vulgus, or a bunion, which separates your big toe to some extent. And I actually wore some special shoes for a few years. I barely even knew about that, but that was also associated with a little bit of flat-footedness. And that may have been the beginnings of some physical issues. I had the measles in the summer between first and second grade when I turned 7. And that is often followed by people being very sickly and having weakened immune systems for 2 or 3 years and getting a lot of other diseases. And it may have contributed to my being hypochondriac and may have contributed to my neurological issues, but there's some evidence from the letters about my first grade that there were some issues even then. But the third grade teacher was really hard on me about my being behind other boys physically. And this was like 1951, I think, 52, when I started taking piano, by the way, which is interesting why I did. But the culture was very much that men are supposed to take care of women and children later in life. I mean, we're just out of a war when men were a little more fungible, as soldiers in a war, and that was very much impressed on us. And I wouldn't be doing my part if I didn't improve. And I was thought not to be able to join in teams very well, like when we played soccer and softball and so forth. I started getting better at it in 5th grade. I also interrupted in class a lot and had some self-control problems. It started getting better in 5th grade and gradually better, even though there were some issues in 7th and 9th grades. And by say 10th grade, I was socially, even though I was a little bit off, introverted and so forth, I was socially much better. Puberty really did fix a lot of things for me, and I was actually interested in being male then, and I even had started having some fantasies about which men were most interesting to look at, probably around 7th grade, and was very sensitive about the idea that something could happen to a man, like in war, and make him disfigured or something, and make him not appealing anymore. And that was something that bothered me. I didn't know what I was going to do with those thoughts, but I sort of assimilated more socially as I got into senior high school. And finally, in 12th grade, it even got better as I got invited to join the Science Honor Society. I did have the condition I had is called dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder. And it wasn't really treated. They tried some physical, they didn't find anything physically, and they tried a psychologist. They wondered if I was physically lazy. They tried a day camp and so forth. But gradually I started, my interests though were, although I looked at women's magazines and watched cooking shows, and that sounds a little suspicious. Well, I also developed an interest in following baseball and football and knowing the rules, and interested in the physics of what happens when a batted ball hits the outfield wall, like in Fenway Park in Boston or something. And when the Griffith Stadium, the wall was in right field. But anyway, and we made cardboard stadiums as pinball stadiums, and we played backyard baseball, And so I did some very boy things. I played with toy trains and blocks and stuff like that. That was more boy play. So it wasn't clear, You might think it was a little bit non-binary, but I think that was probably within normal ranges for, it was just a little not quite as masculine as some people would want. I, the just covering all this. What I would say is I was sort of developing this idea of upward affiliation and wanting to identify with men that were both smart intellectually and physically advanced. And I needed to find someone in my life to identify with, which in a sense is like saying I identify with a male. So that sounds like my identity would have been male, but actually I didn't quite think about it that way. I was a boy biologically, and that's all there was to it. There wasn't any more said about it then. The whole problem when I got into college of William and Mary, which I've covered in other videos before, that you can look up on the playlist. But I think one of the things that would happen, I didn't show the instinct to want to have women that other boys had, even though many of them were from evangelical backgrounds and rural backgrounds. I didn't show and when they sort of questioned me, and also I didn't go to their hazing ceremony because I didn't like what could happen to me. When they would taunt me and so forth, I would sort of throw it back at them, and I wouldn't confirm their suspicion, but I wouldn't completely deny it. I would throw it back at them, and that would kind of, with the irony, that would kind of make them feel even more secure to be around me. In those days, boys were supposed to not have sex before marriage and perform on their wedding night and then say till death do us part, and for richer for poor, and in sickness and health. And of course, many of them had a double standard in their minds that everybody knew about. But this really bothered a lot of boys, and having someone like me around complicated things even further. The world was kind of brutal then, and if you flunked out of college, what was your life going to be like? Now, today we have trade schools, and we have people becoming YouTubers, and we have a lot of other things that college isn't for everyone. But in those days, it was very much, particularly with society, was still kind of segregated. It was only starting to improve slightly in the mid-60s with the civil rights movement. And it took a long time after Brown versus Board of Education to do a lot about segregation. And I did date in 1971. I dated two different women. One in particular went out about 8 times in the fall of 71. And I've never had intercourse with a female. I'll say that right now. My personal opinion is that had I been more competent physically, I would have gotten through that, and I probably would have married and been able to consummate the marriage. But then maybe 10 or 15 years later, I would have reverted back to homosexual interest. And if that had happened during the age of AIDS, it could have been catastrophic for me and for a wife and for a child that she might have had. It could have been a real catastrophe, which was avoided. But I was completely androphilic, but I didn't have any thoughts of being anything other than a boy and a man, or a male, let's say a biological male. And that's all there was to it. So that's kind of what I think, that it's really kind of bare bones. The personality I had, if it were to scale a lot, probably would cause a lot of issues. Society then still had some remnants of fascism, or sort of a personalized kind of soft fascism. If you didn't do very well in school, your life might not be very good. And that was the message that we kept on getting. But that's kind of what I wanted to share with you, just some of my background. I'll just show one picture, if I can get it to come up. I don't know why it's just, and I'll just show one picture and go to should be in the middle here. That's that I can't. Can't quite locate it. The one I had found. Here it is. That's my parents in their apartment, probably in the fall of 1942, before I was conceived. My mother was told afterwards that she couldn't have any more children, which doesn't seem to have been thought of as reliable information. But then again, that's what I've got for tonight. And the next videos are going to be a lot more in depth about what I think is really going on. And I do thank you for listening.